This is my final project demonstration. So for my final project, I decided that I was going to improve my project 3, which is a target shooting game. And the way I improved this was I started by modeling some things in Blender. I created a custom skybox, some new geometries for the ground, and also some custom shaders and textures. First, I'm going to walk you through my Blender models, and then later we'll go into the game and actually watch it perform. So here is my balloon model. This is the first model that I started with. Pretty simple, pretty easy, but I'm actually never done anything in Blender before, so there was a steep learning curve at first. I'm going to go on and show you my next model, which was my tank. I actually created two different models of this tank. There's one with the turret, which is this one, and then also one without the turret. You see I added some details like gears and rivets and extra panels. Just try to make it look a little bit more rugged. Spent a lot of time on this tank. I'm very proud of it. And let's see what else. Our tank rocket. Just tried to add some extra details in here to make it look more like a rocket and not just, a cylinder with a cone on top. Have some rivets on the top dome, an impact point, some little scary spikes on the fins, some rocket boosters. Have my play button, which is for starting the game. I thought it would just be really cool. Instead of just using like an HTML button, I wanted to create my own button. I just thought that would be so much cooler, and I really think it added a lot to my project. And then we have my restart button. And basically when the game's over, this pops up and you can restart and play again. Okay. So I modeled all of those things in Blender. Like I said, this is actually my first time using Blender, so I'm actually pretty proud of my models. I had a lot of issues at first with my models. I created the models and tried to export them as GLB files, but this was really troublesome for me, as the GLB files export the camera and the lighting, and it kind of made it difficult for me later when I was trying to import them. I was having a lot of issues isolating my objects from other things that were in the GLB scene. So I later ended up switching over to GLTF files. This helped me a lot, and it was much easier for me to import my models into my project. I'm going to go ahead and show you my project now. So this is what my game looks like. So you have my tank here and my circle plane with texture, and got some European scenery back here. I was kind of going for like a European battlefield, like a World War II type of theme to it. And you can see I have my play button. My time says start, and you can click anywhere on screen actually and it will start the game. Now I have my balloons and I have my timer counting down. It's a bit short because I was using it for testing, but shoot my rockets. They actually only shoot in one direction. I wasn't able, if I had more time I could have them aim a bit better, but I kind of ran out of time and I never got the rocket aiming quite down or the balloon collision. You can see my restart screen. My time says expired, and we can just click restart and then we can play the game again. There's a timer on the rockets, so you can't just sit there and just shoot off a million of them. You have to, there's a timer for them to reload, and yeah, you can just shoot. I'm actually really, even though it doesn't completely work, I'm really proud of this project. I've worked really hard on it. I made all these models from scratch, so it's really hard for me to critique my own work that I worked really hard on, but I'm super proud of it. I think it's just the coolest thing, especially these restart and start buttons. I think these are so cool. So, yeah, that's what my game looks like. And like I said, I made all of these models from scratch. My tank, this is actually my turretless tank, and then on top of that, I have this cannon created with Three.js, similar to what we did in Project 3, where we had our just turret sitting there on the ground. Yep, and I guess we'll go back to my PowerPoint. So some of my accomplishments was 3D design, rendering. I also used some embedded textures in my models. These textures, this was something that pertains to the GLTF files. So like I said, I originally used the GLB files, but I had issues with those. I could never get them to work. I ended up using the GLTF files, and these are really nice because you can use embedded textures. So that's what I did. I just embedded the textures into my models, and then I just load them and they're ready to go. They're colored and everything, so I think that's the simplest, the best way for me to do it, so that's what I went with. And some more accomplishments was exporting and importing 3D models. This was actually really troublesome for me at first. I spent like days working on just getting my first 3D model to show up, and it was so difficult that I ended up making an entirely new HTML file that was just really simple, and tried to get my models into there, and that still didn't work. So I went online and I tried to find some GLB files, and all the ones that I found that were GLB were actually in the GLTF format. So I got my first downloaded file to work in the GLTF format. I decided to go back into Blender and re-export mine as GLTF, and then I finally got my simple HTML file to work, and I took what I learned from that and I applied it into my project, and then got my 3D models working inside of my project. Another thing I improved in my project from the previous one is I have multi-axis balloon movement. You can see they're rotating and moving up and down. I smoothed out the movement a lot, and you can see they're actually spinning quite quickly if you look at the reflections. So that's another thing that I was pretty proud of. Yeah, and some of the accomplishments that I did in JavaScript was use some callback functions. I learned a lot about asynchronous rendering. So when you use something like a GLTF loader, you are rendering your 3D model in a asynchronous callback function. This gave me a few problems at first. Like my models would be loading in, and then later in the code I'd be trying to use them, but my callback function hadn't finished loading them, and I would get like object or null instances or objects that didn't exist, and cause my code to crash. So that was something that I learned about and something that I had to fix. Another thing is JavaScript promises, where it's like basically what I described, where you have something loading and there's other code that's trying to use it and it's not yet loaded, so you have to use a promise that says, I promise this object will be supplied by the time the code is run. Get a little more into that in the next slide. Sorry. So also using the GLTF loader. I originally tried to use the JSON loader, but it was actually deprecated, so that wasn't really much help for me. I ended up going with the GLTF loader, and it worked better. I guess it works better than JSON loader, but it's specifically what I got to work for me. So I was pretty happy with the GLTF loader. And another thing that I used that I haven't used before was object cloning. So sometimes when I was loading in objects through my GLTF loader, I needed to clone some objects, or I would just be moving the same object several times around the screen and not actually creating new ones. For example, in like a for loop where you're loading in multiple ones, I was really just loading the same one like 120 times instead of loading 120 objects. My to-do list is I want to add some tank movement and improved hit recognition. As you saw in the demo, I need to improve my hit recognition so that the balloons will disappear when they collide with my rocket projectile. And my wish list is just going forward in the future. I would like to add 3D traversable landscape and spinning tank tracks. Tank tracks was a little bit complicated because originally I had an array modifier creating my tank tracks, and when I joined them to export, it collapsed them into a single object, and I no longer had tank tracks. I just had one tank tread under each wheel instead of an array of tank tracks. I'd also like to add an FPS aimer on screen, like some sort of box on screen that shows where my cannon is aimed. And like I was talking about earlier with the GLTF loader and the JSON loader, I was having a lot of issues with it, and I spent a considerable amount of time, much more than I would have liked to, on getting my GLTF loader to work. So in my frustration, I just wanted to help some other people out that are also trying to do this and maybe new to the whole 3D modeling in Blender and importing into Three.js. So I created my own tutorial on basically just covering all these concepts, creating 3D objects, embedded materials, and importing and exporting the GLTF files. I created my own JavaScript HTML file that I have linked in the description of the video, so that you can, once you've followed along and created your exported GLTF file, you can just open up my provided file in WebStorm and see your 3D model displayed in the browser. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my YouTube video so I can show you. So here you can see my YouTube video, and I just basically walk you through how to create a 3D object in Blender. Create a little stick man, and I color it, apply an embedded texture, and then I export it. And I walk completely through the process, so there's no question. Anyone who sees this video can do it. I also added in closed captions on the video that I did custom, so that anyone can just see exactly the buttons that I pressed and no one will get lost. They can follow along really easily. And like I said, anyone can watch this video, no matter how old you are, how much experience. It's very easy to follow along and create your own model. And then below I have my code. This is the code for displaying your model right here. So here's the code that I have supplied, and basically you could just name your file untitled, or you could change this to your file name and then run this in your browser, and you'll have your model displayed in the browser. And I actually showed this video to my nephew who's 10 years old, and after watching it once or twice, he actually went through and made a little car, and he made a little 3D model car and was able to get it to display in the browser. So I thought that was really awesome. He was really inspired by this, and he's been asking me about coding a lot, so I was really happy about that. And I think that I've created the next generation of programmers. So I'm really happy with this project. I'm really happy with this class. I really appreciate the experiences that I've had in this class, and I can honestly say I'm inspired to go out and create some more games. It's been a lot of fun, really rewarding, and as a result, we've also inspired my nephew to go out and program too, so I think that's so cool. And yeah, so I guess some more things that I've learned. So it's 3D design, rendering and exporting, shading, textures, lighting, debugging was a big one. My goodness, did I learn how to debug in this project. But you know, these hard experiences, I feel like they've really made me a better programmer, so I am grateful for that. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you have